Liz, it's just such a joy to be able to hand over the talking stick to you this morning for our community here on day two. But just a quick introduction. Before I start this session, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which I'm living and working today. That's the Yalukit Willam clan of the Great Kulin Nation, whose stolen lands were never ceded, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And also I always, it's my privilege to foreground that as a migrant to this country, I benefit from countless generations of cultural inheritance from those First Nations people who've gathered, loved, met, and made creative work here before us. And that's a cultural legacy that I and others benefit greatly from, and I offer my gratitude to them for that. Liz, you are an associate professor in the School of Education at the University of Queensland, where you teach research methods, gender studies, and arts education, among many other things. You've published widely, including most recently, Writing Feminist Autoethnography, which is a stellar contribution. It's a killer book. It's going to win lots of awards. It's coming out, I think, early next year, right? You run and read and ruffle around in a material world with those in your life that you love to remember, love, as you've said, but you've also established, and I want to mention, convenes this hugely popular online, offline group called DRAW, Departing Radically in Academic Writing. And that's a writing group for grad students, but many, many others in our academic community who want and have committed ourselves to writing our work differently in an alternative style, but also as a community of artists, activists, and scholars. So I thank you also for establishing that beautiful community and practice. And without further ado, I will hand over to you, Liz, for today's keynote. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dan, for that really humbling and warm welcome. And I am extremely humbled that you've invited me to present today. I have been part of the CAE family right from the beginning, and it's with so much love that I share my thinking with all of you. You are my skin, and I'm so delighted to be here. I'll share my screen with you. Today, I want to talk to you about being in love with theory, language, and the words of women writers. I would like to begin by acknowledging that this piece is presented by a white settler colonial woman sitting on the stolen lands of Yagara and Turrbal peoples. When I stand on my 7th floor apartment balcony, I see Maiwa rivering, just as she always has, carrying relationality between people and place along with her, carrying past, present, and future Yagara and Turrbal ways of being, doing, and knowing with her, carrying the uninvited load of conflict, contact, and coloniality with her. And I pay my respects to Yagara and Turrbal peoples, there and then, here and now, and those yet to come. Yagara and Turrbal sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and will be Yagara and Turrbal country. I am grateful. I pay my respects to those who sit with me, beside me from another country. My Yanua, Gara, Mara, and Gurangi families at Borroloola in the Northern Territory, who at times seem so very far away, but close, always so close. I'm grateful to them for showing me another way of living, loving, and writing response and sensibly in this world as a white settler colonial woman. Kinabilira bari bari, awiria kundiara, pawajibana. And I said, I have fallen in love. And Jeanette said, oh, it's easy to fall in love. And then I said, I'm in love with words. And then Jeanette said, the world of words is a total world. And in a total world, we fall in love. And I said, I think I've been in love with words for a very long time. And Jeanette said, love takes time. And then I said, it is not only words I am in love with, but language too. And then Jeanette said, this is a connection many writers share, a love of language with ourselves and with others, a devoted love that is at once faithful and desirous. And I said, oh, I am in love with writing too. And Jeanette said, and in writing, you can only offer an exceptional sensibility combined with an exceptional control over words to draw the world out, break the air with colour and the beat of life. Because there are words, and there are words only. The words are the thing. And then I said, words have wrapped themselves around me with love and set me on a path to love in writing autoethnography. And then Jeanette said, words are indeed the most lovely, lovable, and loving things. I've only just begun to fall in love with the work of British author of Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, Jeanette Winterson. But like Jeanette, I've been in love with words, language, and writing for as long as I can remember. Words and language are, after all, the things we work with to write autoethnography. The word autoethnography itself etches writing into our brains, bodies, and souls. And because the words we write are to withstand an escape across time to tell stories wherever so they fall, there's no trifling with words. Virginia Woolf insisted, it can't be done. And so, with respect, reverence, and raptness for words as sovereign things in their own right, we lovingly place them into our carrier bags of autoethnographic writing to offer truth with a wink in every personal as possible political and as social story we write. As critical autoethnographers, it is not only words and language that we love, we are also in love with theory. Theory is the lamp which lights the criticality and the creativity in our autoethnographic spine, and moves with us to follow the question, how shall I live? I doubt that there is not one among us here who is not in love with theory, words, and language. And in this piece, I invite you to remember the love you hold for these things too, as you write the critical autoethnography you love. In this moment, I share the particular love I hold for feminist thinkers, scholars, and writers, and the ways their words have wrapped themselves around me with love and set me on a path to love in writing critical autoethnography, and quite explicitly and exquisitely feminist autoethnography. At the beginning of my work as a becoming feminist autoethnographer, senior Yanyil women in my family, Magundiara, Ania Karakain Isaac, Murinji Miller, Dinah Amanganawi Norman, and Hilda Jarman Newer, gifted me with lessons of love about what it means to be a woman and women in the world, and how I might write autoethnography in a way that reciprocates my response and sensibilities of being in relationality with them as a white settler colonial woman. It is a gift I'm still working to return with love. My love affairs with Virginia Woolf, Simone de Beauvoir, Simone Weil, Ursula K. Le Guin, Elaine Sixou, Kathleen Stewart, Bell Hooks, and Ruth Behar began in different times and in different places. When I didn't know it was love I was looking for, it was a particular kind of love they shared in their writing. A personal is political, is philosophical, is poetical feminist love that has stayed with me ever since. I would love you to fall in love with them and all of their words too. The way words are written matters to each and every one of us. How words come to matter in writing matters, and what happens when words are out there in the world matters most. There is an ethic of love for words and what they do in the world that runs through all of their writing. You might even say it is this that moves autoethnography to movement and invites us to hush, pay attention to words. Magundiara, VW, the two Simones, UKL, Katie, Belle, and Ruth have all shown me ways to enter into intimate relationship with theory, words, and language, creativity and criticality, emotion and experience, with myself and others as women writing. And when braided, move us to a way of wording and writing the world as autoethnographers in love. The pieces I share with you today are a selection of writing with these women writers from the book that's coming out in early next year, Writing Feminist Autoethnography, and ask us to think and wonder about the way their work with words flows in, around, with and between head thinking, wondering, writing, and heart thinking, wondering, writing. These are the heartlines I offered to you, my love for the theory, words, and language of women writers. I hope you're moved to catch them. Dear Virginia, I trust that you'll be excited by what I'm about to share with you. I am about to begin a piece entitled Virginia and Me, Writing Feminist Autoethnography, No Longer Afraid, for my new work. And even though I've written extensively with you before, this time my focus is on your thinking and wondering and wording about writing as woman, writing as feminist, and writing about the importance of writing the everyday, and yet always already beyond the cotton wool of daily life. My desire, Virginia, is to show the willful ways your words and your writing about words and writing cast a line for us to see beyond the cotton wool of daily life, to see that the beauty of the world, which is so soon to perish, has two edges, and to see the possibilities of writing feminist autoethnography with you as a moment to see the heart of the world flowing through our veins in movement towards life of the world uncovered, but for a moment. Letter writing, perhaps like diary writing too, was an important personal, political, social, historical, cultural, we could add many descriptors here, act, a performative committing to individual and collective memory of life as you experienced it, a way of speaking with self and others, of those things both great and small that occupied your heart and mind. Letter writing might be seen as a diary note to, with and through the social, while diary writing might well be thought of as a letter to, with and through the self, about the same. I'm captivated by your letter and diary writing style, and while I know my own prose can only ever be in poor imitation, I am going to practice both in my copybook, which this piece represents. I shall write a letter to you about the feminist autoethnographic lines I read in your writer's diary and intertwine them with my lines from my own to underline all of the feminist autoethnographic lines your writing casts. Words that wrap tightly around my waistline and provide a lifeline as together we march right up to the front line to decline the hard lines of the masculine line, the air and bloodline words that breathe and pump life into the dead lines and the pipelines that seek to contain and crush us, words that refuse to be sidelined or streamlined and fight to create a new baseline on the borderlines of a room we might come to call our own, words that write the heart lines of feminist autoethnography. Affectionately yours with a single line, L. Ngabiara Marawara, Malijibara. She called me over to her place in the shade on the porch. She was called by many names, Annie Isaac, Annie Karakine Isaac, Mrs. Isaac, or sometimes simply Karakine. I called her Marawara, a Yanyuwa word for female cross-cousin, even though she was 50 or more years older than me. Marawara was already a big boss woman, and I remember how often she reminded and growled me that I was not just a young girl, but a baby on Yanyuwa country with much to learn. You're right, Marawara, she said. I'll learn you proper way. Marawara taught me, a white settler colonial woman and mother to two of her grandchildren, the centrality of love, care and compassion to the ways in which we are born, live and die in this world as women. Hundiara, Marawara explained, are those women who talk, walk, sing and dance beside you when you're a young girl, those who hold you close as you enter into womanhood and cradle you in their arms when you give birth to your own. Hundiara, Marawara said, lift their voices up in song and kick up the dust on the ceremony ground alongside you. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, thinking and wondering, I close my eyes and I can hear her singing. Her voice rises higher and higher, calling up and out to the mermaid women, the Amararabana, who gave Yanyuwa women their own law. In song, she told me, most especially in song and in ceremony, we Kundiara are strong women, women ourselves, bosses ourselves. Bundiara, Marawara taught me, nurture your body, heart, and soul. They hold you close as you experience love and life. Karakine draws 2 circles with a finger in the sand. Look here, Marawara. She points to the one on the left. You and me partners here, she explains, and makes 4 gentle depressions as she traces around the edge of the circle. Nungarima, Nimarama, Naminyama, and Nulyarima. We all partners. I sit and listen quietly. Nungarima. I recognise this word as one of 2 skin names for women from the Rumbaria clan. It was the one I was given when I first arrived at Borroloola to place me in proper relationality with Yanura people and country as a woman married to a Yaka Māori man of the Wuralea clan. She's Nungarima, Akole Marawara, Karakine said when she introduced me and my skin to others. Then, in that moment of naming, a rush of warmth from head to heart, like the sun on your skin after a long time standing in the shade. Menguangala, the past and present interconnectedness of family with emotion, experience, and every when. Naming is important. Naming places you. Naming marks you as belonging. Naming imprints who you are in relationality with. This one, she's my grandson's wife. This one, Mijiji, Karakine would add, by way of explaining me and my skin to others. Mijiji, Mrs., a white woman. Then, in that moment of naming, an explosion of heat as the warmth escapes from heart to head, the rays becoming too hot, itching, scratching and burning. Coloniality, the past and present interconnectedness of family with dominance, oppression and violence. Naming is important. Naming places you. Naming marks you as belonging. Naming imprints who you are in relationality with. Marawara, you listen close now, Ngabiara. Karakine's voice brings me back to the circle on the left in the sand. Nungarima, Nimarama, Nulyarima, and Naminyana. They are my partner, our partner, Minyu. She places one hand on her chest and reaches forward to touch mine with the other. You too, Marawara. You partner for this mob. She pauses, then shakes her head slightly, pointing to the circle on the right. But not this one different for you and me. Like Gujaka, you and me, Mum, she belongs to this one. Nangalama, Niwanama, Nulana, Nuralama. That's her partner. I repeat the partner groupings back to Karakine and she nods, smiles a little at the awkwardness of the names in my mouth. There's more, Marawara. I've got one more thing to say to you about you and me partners. Yinda. Karakine's voice is low. Yinda anatamara. She stops then and looks me straight on, face to face, eye to eye. There's no possibility of turning away. Yinda. She touches my hand again. Anata. Karakine moves her hand once more to her chest, her eyes still firmly fixed on mine. Mara, she says softly, clasping her hands together at her heartline. Dearest Virginia, the most curious and delightful thought occurred to me as I was running this morning, as is my usual habit. The rhythm of my feet on the pavement lugged my thinking into waves, and soon enough my thoughts and I were carried along with its current. I seemed to lose my presence in the outer world as I became more and more attuned to the inner beat in my brain, willing my thoughts to travel this way and that in time with my feet. Soon enough, they arrived at Professor Von X in a room of one's own, his large domed head rotating furiously around and turning red as he rushed for his measuring rods to prove himself superior, spitting and spatting about how women are intellectually, morally and physically inferior to men. I waved, trying not to giggle as I passed him by, and so delighted by the laughter in my mind, I didn't even notice Professor Z lurking around the corner and almost bowled him over. I wished I had, because then I may not be so frightened to untie my tongue and write the words that speak to my experience as a woman. Writing years and generations apart, we have the same story to tell, Virginia, for the battles are not all won. Some daughters are still skirmishing on the bridge, and it is still dangerous for a woman to say what she really thinks and feels. You called yourself a coward, Virginia, wary and afraid of the lashes that the professors, the patriarchs, would so easily lay upon your shoulders for going behind the back of the other sex to tell us what you found. But no, you had no issue with flinging the heads of angels with ink pots, which takes quite a bit of courage, don't you think? And then there it was, raw and rapturous like the breaking of the surf upon the sand, the thought that I went out running for, the thought that I might write a little book, not unlike A Room of One's Own. And I shall call it Writing Feminist Autoethnography. I shall lay out all the ways in which all of the W's, women writing words, willfully come together to tell our truths about the world, the truths about things as we think, feel, and sense them. Your EM. Because I was sitting at the side of a funeral ceremony ground, recording the work of family, returning the spirits of people once loved back to their heart country when the phone rang. It was my father. And as I watched the ashes from the dead rise, I knew. Because I do not remember boarding the Greyhound bus from Darwin, Borroloola to Darwin. I do not remember boarding the plane from Darwin to Melbourne. I do not remember my Baba, my Murinji, holding me close to her as I said goodbye. I do not remember her whispering quietly that I needed to go home to return and say goodbye to my Abaji, my father's mother, and that I, more than anything, I needed to do this the proper way. Because I do not remember expressing my concern to my colleagues in the field before I left that paying people for singing with flour, tobacco and blankets was taking a neo-colonial turn. I do not remember reminding them that their informants were my family and I would have no part of it. I do not remember speaking on the phone to the research team I had been working with at Borroloola and telling them that in no uncertain terms I could no longer continue and would not be returning after I had buried my grandmother. I do not remember my PhD advisor accusing me of taking the moral high ground and warning me that she could and would ruin my academic career before it had even begun. Make no mistake. I do not remember telling her that my PhD didn't matter anymore. What mattered was doing things the proper way and following my broken heart. I do not need to remember these things because my field notes and writing remember for me. Because my heart was broken, I looked for the writing of scholars that would help me find the shattered pieces so that I could return to the work I loved. I asked music ethnographers I knew well who had worked in remote Aboriginal communities like Borroloola and spent time with people on country recording songs and ceremonies. Where is your love working? But they handed me pages and pages of musical analysis, which gave lip service to those performers and communities and proceeded to wax unlyrically and without love, replete with words like melodic nucleus, isorhythmic formulae, and contour representations, emic variants, and upper octave statements. I then asked anthropologists of music who had been fields much further away than Australia, but had similarly made themselves at home in the lives of others to document and record experience. Where is your love working? But I am scolded and reminded in no uncertain terms that there is no room for emotion in what we do, because what we do is focus on the structure of music as a sound system and the functioning of music as part of human culture. When the shadows in these fields began to grow long and dark, I asked the new disciplinary kids, where is your love working? Because Ruth Bahar, Jewish, Cuban, American professor of anthropology at the University of Michigan, fiction writer, poet, essayist, and filmmaker, a woman of the border, between places, between languages, between cultures, between longings and illusions, 1 foot in the academy and 1 foot out. Because I read The Vulnerable Observer in one sitting, a collection of essays written by her between 1987 and 1996, where she explores the relationships between emotion, empathy, and experience in the process of ethnographic research and writing. Because she had loved and lost her beloved grandparent too, and so many others along the way. Because she lamented the ways in which our field notes, replete as they are with everything we have heard, seen and shared with others, become useless palimpsests, unless plumbed for forgotten revelatory moments, unexpressed longings and the wounds of regret once our suitcases are unpacked. Because she asked, how might we give up the cloak of academic objectivity? we have worn so persistently, and feeling much like a truant schoolgirl, she then began to write vulnerably. Because with our hearts broken, we need to return to the lost home of our imaginations. Because we refuse to write the boring stuff. We refuse stultifying and stinky academic prose, rationality, reliability, reason, and willfully replace them with relationality, replete with life, love, and writing. We refuse to reproduce Eurocentric prestige knowledge hierarchies just because everyone else does. We refuse compassion fatigue and moral flabbiness. We refuse to turn the vigorous flesh and blood people we live, love, and write with into ponderous slugs of theory. Burn down the walls that say we must, throw dead leaves on bonfires and dance, because we listen for the music in our writing and for our sentences to sing. Because we must learn more about the vulnerable words in, through, and of the world that have come before us. We must pay attention to letters, words, sentences, paragraphs, and ask, what's the use? We must read more writing that lives and loves. We must read the readings that writers we love live by. We must learn how the writers we love learn to write. Because we want to take risks. We want to live, love, and write words that take you by the throat and won't let you go. Because we want to call ourselves writers, plain and simple. Dearest Virginia, I'm writing to you because my baba, or sister, as you would be more familiar with, Murinjinua, died yesterday in Borroloola. I've been unable to write since then, as I'm not clear enough in my head to feel anything except varieties of dull despair, raging grief, and profound sadness. When I first went to Borroloola, I was very young, very white, and very naive about the ways of the world, about this and her world. But for some reason, Baba decided she would hold me close. And she did for the next 22 years and more. She called me sister and gifted me a sisterhood filled with kindness, generosity, wisdom, and love. Baba was Kundiara for me. She taught me how to sing the songs of her mothers and grandmothers, Akrija, Angariji, and Ayawaru. She took me to many places on Yanua country and told stories of then and now, her memories of the people and places she loved, and her hopes and dreams for the people and places she loved who would remain long after she passed. I had been certain she may leave this world soon because of the coil woven basket that has sat on my kitchen bench for years now. A little bent out of shape, it is large enough to hold a hand of bananas and avocados to ripen alongside, handwritten shopping lists on scraps of recycled paper, payment reminder notices, items placed there for safekeeping by my children, hair ties and loose elastic bands. The basket was a gift from my Marawara and Kudianda diner among the Ngāi Norman. She had been sitting with me for days, patiently guiding my hands to learn the craft of women. It was delicate and demanding work, and I sensed she knew it would be some time before I held anything material that remotely resembled a functional object of my own, naturally dyed in shades of pink, orange, red, brown, and ochre. Marawara's basket carries the smell of pandanus fronds, carefully stripped, dried, and braided, the smell of a smouldering fire brewing strong tea, the smell of sweat on a sultry summer day. It carries the sound of her voice, the sound of her voice telling me what to do next, the sound of her voice singing in harmony with the rhythm of her hands. It carries her noki, her essence. But you see, over the last few months, the basket has begun to shed sand. We are not strangers to sand in our house. We have a thin glass red bottle filled with sand from Manangura, the place of Nana Hilda's birth. You remember her. She's my children's great-grandmother, and her mother's dreaming, the tiger shark country. Nana Hilda only returned to this place a few years ago before she passed away as Jungai, law guardian for mother's country, for Manangura on a land claim. They flew her there in a helicopter to take care of her old bones. She carefully climbed out of the helicopter onto her mother's country and laid herself down. She picked up handfuls of sand and gently rubbed the grains all over her body, wailing from the depths of a heart struck asunder, whereby those who witnessed it fell down alongside her and wept too. The first time I noticed the grains of sand on the kitchen bench, I turned the basket over and over. searching, scanning, and sensing the wefts and warps to see if any were frayed or failing. The basket seemed to be whole, and yet the sand keeps appearing each day in small piles onto the kitchen bench. If Marawara were here, she would nod her head wisely and say, "Might be something, Marawara. Might be the basket is weeping now, Buddha, for your sister, your Elizabeth." Ursula Kroeber Le Guin insisted that it is above all by the imagination that we achieve perception and compassion and hope in relation to human life as it is lived, as it might be lived, and as it ought to be lived. With this entangled creative and ethical response and sensibility, she became one of the most revered and beloved feminist speculative science fiction and fantasy writers of the 20th century. Le Guin wrote over 50 novels, volumes of short stories, collections of essays, children's books, and volumes of poetry, many of these while taking care of her 3 young children. When she died in January 2018, another fiercely feminist speculative fiction writer I adore, Margaret Atwood, wrote of her friend, "Her voice was steadfastly sane, committed, annoyed, humorous, wise, and always intelligent. Le Guin was always asking the same urgent question: what sort of world do you want to live in?" I think and wonder now as I write with Le Guin about feminist autoethnography that perhaps this is a question, this question is why I'm attracted to her work. She and I are asking exactly the same thing. What kind of world might feminist autoethnography come to word? The woman waited a while before speaking, her gaze firmly fixed on Elizabeth's face. "I've been thinking about meeting you, what I might say and how I might say it when the moment came, for some time." Elizabeth wanted to speak, but her tongue felt heavy with questions and tied in knots with possible answers. "I have no right to speak to you," the woman continued. "What I have is the responsibility you have given me to speak to you, and so I shall." Elizabeth sat motionless. "And I refuse to speak to you in the father tongue." A hint of recognition tugged at the corner of Elizabeth's mouth. "This language you know, Elizabeth," the woman nodded. "I'm not speaking specifically about your father, or anyone's father for that matter. I'm speaking about the tongue that speaks the language of power, of social power. You and I learned it well in school. It doesn't speak itself, it only lectures, and it is indeed an excellent dialect." Elizabeth lifted her head sharply. The woman's tone had changed, no longer soft but sharp with sarcasm. "All the great thinkers and social theorists wrote it: Descartes, Kant, Marx, Darwin, Freud, Boas, Lacan, Levi-Strauss, Sartre, Bourdieu, and Goetz." Elizabeth joined the incantation, names she didn't even realize she knew falling from her mouth. "The father tongue speaks a language of thought that seeks objectivity. Spoken from above, it forces a gap, splits the world, and goes only one way." The woman pointed her finger backwards into the distance. "It does not expect an answer, and those who do not speak it are silenced or unheard." Elizabeth knew that feeling only too well. She loved her father, but how many times had he used his tongue to tie up her own when she had tried to speak otherwise, and reminded her to only speak when spoken to, or not at all? Yes, that language, the language of the fathers, of man ascending, man the conqueror, civilized man, is not your native tongue. The woman paused. Her dark eyes began to twinkle, alive with something that hovered just on the raw edges of life. The woman reached forward and gently took hold of Elizabeth's hand. "I'm going to teach you, if you will allow me, how to unlearn the lessons and language of the father's tongue and return you to the language you know by heart, the language that is always on the verge of silence and often on the verge of song. It's the language that stories are told in." With each word, Elizabeth felt herself being drawn toward and bound to the woman. With a start and without a doubt, she knew why. The woman was speaking to her as a woman. "Not only the language of women, Elizabeth, I am going to speak to you in the mother tongue." The woman's voice became earthy and low. "I'm there where it's talking. Where that speaks, I am in that talking place. Where that says my being is. Where my being there is speaking, I am." She squeezed Elizabeth's hand tighter. "Will you allow me to walk with you there to that talking place where your being can speak to remember who you are?" The world turned quiet for a moment. When Elizabeth spoke next, it was barely a whisper. Have you ever had that feeling that the life you're riding in and through is not the one you were meant to? That you're simply going through the motions day by day, waiting for the story you were supposed to share and the writer you were supposed to be to begin to speak? Large turtle tears welled in her eyes. I've tried to shake it, but it stays with me like a shadow. The woman murmured softly, a shadow on snow, only in dark there is light, only in silence the word. She looked at Elizabeth then, the message in her eyes clear and present. To light a candle is to cast a shadow, and it is dangerous, that power. It must follow knowledge and serve need, both and one. Shall we then? Shall we begin this perilous journey with light as the left hand of darkness to guide us? Elizabeth nodded without hesitation. She was ready. She had been, it seemed, forever. The woman reached into her carrier bag and carefully handed Elizabeth a book. Dearest Virginia, I'm writing with you during the day and dreaming of you during the night, and I don't mind at all. The shape of my thinking and wondering about writing Woolfian feminist autoethnography floats in fragments of sentences, phrases, paragraphs, chapters, essays, and novels of yours I have read and absorbed while awake, and present themselves as short sketches and swift scribblings while asleep. In my visions, with hair flowing loosely, Eugenie from the years dances over and around blazing flames in 3 guineas, arm in arm with Shakespeare's sister as she pens words similarly wild, free, and poised to set the world on fire. And then there we are, you and I walking hand in our new dresses through the arches of the scrolloping sandstone buildings at the University of Queensland. We pass under the inscription above the tower entrance, which reads, "Great is truth and mighty above all things." Kick off our shoes, ignore the gravel paths and run barefoot onto the hallowed turf, laughing hysterically about these words that speak of truth and might and things as if there is any truth or might about any of these things. Devil may care, as the security guards, well, we fancied they were beadles in disguise, with their heavy boots and keychains keep a cautious eye on us. Together we lay down on the freshly cut lawn and turn our faces to the sun, delighting in the warm spring day to watch the kaleidoscope of pretty tropical lemon migrant and blue tiger butterflies scudding and fluttering hither and thither above us. And without warning, there it was, a moment where proportions changed, sheer beauty beheld, and we wondered, what's the phrase for that? We sink into the hush that has descended upon us, and after a time, a few seconds, a minute, a day even, I can't be sure because there is no clock chiming away the hours, I look across and notice tears falling between us, between the two edges of a frail and beautiful world. On the one there is laughter, and on the other there is anguish, cutting our hearts asunder. Quietly and softly you whisper, could we not fly too, with broad wings and with softness, and be all one wing, all embracing, all gathering, and these boundaries, these pryings overhead into hidden compartments of different colours be swept up into one colour by the brush of the wing, and so visit in splendour augustly peaks, and there lie exposed, bare on the spine, high up to the cold light of the moon rising. And when the moon rises, single, solitary, behold her, one eminent over us. I watch from above as you simply fade away, like a puff of smoke from the dying embers of Eugenie's bonfire. And I'm left solitary on the grass, asleep in shadow and alone. A butterfly whose wings are now pinned firmly to the masculinist ground on which I lay. There will be no words writing or womanly flying today. Writing, life, says Kathleen Stewart, is the moment when the matters of life become the matter of words. For her, writing happened under worldly pressure and soon became a commitment to drag whatever worldly compositions she lighted upon into the catchment area of writing. Try to keep up with what's happening in the everyday, she insists, impatient with the shorthand and the long-winded. With what's happening now. What is it? What's it doing? Did you hear the caress of that butterfly's wings in your mind as she fluttered on the edges of your soul in the 5 minutes it took you to walk from the car park to your office? When I began reading the whirling refrains of Kathleen Stewart, it was, it still is, very easy to find myself wrapped up in the warmth of her words, willingly becoming woven into the weft and warp of her writing and wanting to follow her weave into my own. Riding the rhythms of her hands as she writes, I read everything I can find that she's written and find myself, which self I'm not quite sure, but one I can feel becoming awake to what's happening. She reminded me she's been writing ethnography for over 30 years, and then eventually reveals she learned to write in her own skin, like it or not. Because she was a girl, she woke when her alarm sounded. She put on her uniform quickly without fuss and smoothed down the pockets of her dress. She tidied her room and made her bed every morning before she went to school. She did as she was told. She always put her hand up in class and handed her homework in on time. She rarely missed a day. She looked after her younger sister in the afternoons and set the table for dinner. She and her older sister took turns to wash and dry the dishes and tried their best not to argue. She dusted the house, vacuumed and cleaned the bathroom on Saturday. She went to church on Sunday and recited the prayers as she looked at St. Cecilia smiling in the stained glass window. She helped her mother bake biscuits in the afternoon. She gave her mother and father a kiss goodnight. She never read past her bedtime because she was a girl. She watches and waits. The Attorney General is speaking at a press conference. He has been accused of historical rape and vehemently denies it ever happened. He refuses to stand down. The Prime Minister stands beside him. The Attorney General becomes emotional when he begins to talk about how unfair it would be for him to step aside and sacrifice his career on the basis of unfounded allegations. He cries. He fucking cries. And the country cries with him. Don't you know this poor man's mental health is at risk? The Attorney General may not remember the incident, but the woman who he raped did. The Attorney General does not speak one word about her, and neither does she speak. The woman who was raped can't. She is dead. She took her own life. She no longer watches and waits because she remembers too. She joins other women, sisters and strangers alike, and screams in rage. Are we still fighting for this shit? Unbelievable. Kept at the margins of the world, other and apart. Where is she? Who is she? How is she? If a woman cannot sound out her own heart. She watches with eyes closed his construction and constraint of her, kept at the margins of the world, other and apart. His gaze blocks her way and becomes her own. It takes a dead woman to live in this world if a woman cannot sound out her own heart. She's the angel of flying death. She's the misty pestilence whose shadow shimmers and bursts, kept at the margins of the world, other and apart. They did invent her, wise mediator yet untamed against all reason. She still dreams through his dreams if a woman cannot sound out her own heart. The lost sex, the second sex. She's there, she exists, but her language is not heard, kept at the margins of the world, other and apart, if a woman cannot sound out her own heart. The more I read and write with Beauvoir, the more I hear her words sounding into the thinking and writing heart of feminist autoethnography as a possibility. Words that insist on the experience and expression of the self and the social as situated, lived, bodily, and in liberatory connection. Beauvoir's words speak to an ethical commitment to writing in non-violent self-other relationships against abstract possession of knowledge towards loving and again wisdom. Her words provide us with a set of tools to think and wonder anew about language and writing and who we are as writers so that we might better put all three to work in a feminist autoethnography of commitment. Beauvoir's words remind us of the profound responsibility of committed feminist autoethnography to insist on an intimate connection with experience and existence, with life's difficult questions, with challenging and subverting the social order in which we live, and with writing as politics. One of the most famous photographs of Beauvoir pictures her in a red dressing gown. She did most of her writing in it. She did not care for the fashion of red, but for the freedom it rode. She wrote for the red blood of others. She wrote for women to become their own revolutionary red. She wanted to show the world all of her personal as political treasures, but not all of them were red. I've now read Beauvoir. I've read many others reading and writing about Beauvoir, and it is time to write with her, not about her, in my own colour of red. I could not live with myself if I were to write about Beauvoir. Writing about her would be to imagine I have a hold on her, that my writing rewrites to fix her and set her right by constructing a more conformist version. Would I not be guilty of the kind of violence towards the other she writes against if I claimed an authority about her in my own writing as self? My plush red dressing gown would soon be covered in red blood, first hers and then mine. Reading and writing with Beauvoir in relation with the possibility of feminist autoethnography then is about entering into a dialogue with the deeply personalist political experiences and creative shocks her work engenders. No need for prediction or proclamation of any kind. That is not the kind, or indeed kind writing with Beauvoir I'm engaging in, as I move towards a meeting with her in my plush red dressing gown. My dearest Virginia, would you believe I have now written over 22,000 words in letters to you? Some days I feel I am writing too quickly, without thought, and I don't like it at all. And others, even the thought of thought hardens my words before they have had the chance to fly from pen to paper. And I'm afraid not one of them wise or wild or worthy enough for your perusal. I'm to write what I like, and they're to say what they like, you once said, and affirmed your commitment to freedom as a writer. I keep saying to myself, I will put a full stop here, I will close my sentences there, and then I will cast a concluding line, and that shall be that. But just as I'm paused to end it all, there you are, standing next to me by the river with your fishing rod, throwing another impossible idea attached to a paper-thin cable high into the air, teasing, catch! And I watch helplessly as my heart, mind, and body rush along the banks to follow you until I'm quite out of breath. Oh, how I wish I had just been able to come out and say quite plainly what I had wanted to say about Woolfian feminist autoethnography, indeed of writing feminist autoethnography. If only I had been able to conjure up a phrase like, Mrs. Dalloway said she would buy the flowers herself. I think and wonder now that Mrs. Dalloway is perhaps where I might have begun my discussion with you about feminist autoethnography, most beloved Bee. If I could have my being in time in relation in writing with you over and again, I would invite you and Mrs. Dalloway to sit with me by the fire in a room of our own. And perhaps, if we were feeling fierce, brave and daring, we would throw leaves upon leaves and dance around a bonfire in the backyard as it blazed, and consider the truths, tied as they might be ever so slightly to fact. And then when the fire dies down and the embers lay softly flickering and waving goodbye, you and I will return to thinking and wondering that perhaps this was it. This was all, and it's as much we needed to write feminist autoethnography. With a sudden intensity and clarity, we will then take up our brushes, our bricks, and the blossoms we have bought for ourselves and draw a line right there in the centre before exclaiming, there, this is our vision. We will word the world with letters, phrases, sentences, books that pay attention to the extraordinariness of the moments we inhabit, that make it possible for us, all of us, to spread our wings and fly free from all of the Professor Von X's that seek to contain us, that insist on the wholeness of thinking, becoming writing, becoming our way of living and loving in the world, and in doing so, ride the critical and feminist autoethnographic waves which ebb and flow with the rhythm of one of my favourite phrases of yours. We are the words, we are the music, we are the thing itself. Your Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Liz. That is amazing. I'm going to suggest we move to gallery view and maybe stop share, Liz. And we have some time for comments and questions and applause for you. Yeah. And rather than, we've got a really nice love chat going on. So if you do have a question, just jump right in or raise your hand if that works better for you. Liz, I'll just say it's so beautiful to hear you read that. I've encountered this on the page, which is always delightful, but hearing those words of those women in your voice and through your body, it really does add a level of depth and warmth to what you encounter on the page. And I really love seeing your drawings in relation to to the performance of those words and your beautiful, beautiful theorizing and thinking.
Thank you, Stacey. I think particularly with Virginia Woolf letters, she's such a playful writer. She's got such a wicked sense of humour, mixed with all of the other, you know, poignant observations of the beauty and the terror of life. And it is a lot of fun reading her words aloud and also trying to mimic particularly her letter writing and diary writing style. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and that epistolary form is just so so in tune with what you're doing and those words. I really love that. Oh, I've got something here from Rebecca, who says, talking about the word just yesterday, we were talking about that as a kind of qualifier, making every day, I think in relation to prayer yesterday. People often say just words, but you, Liz, make them worlds in the flesh. And so could you speak to that, the word, making words world in the flesh?
Thank you. That's a really lovely question. All of the writers that I think and write with in this book are in love with words. And I guess I've really taken by Virginia Woolf's thinking about words. The way she talks about words, she holds them as sentient beings. And she thinks of them as having a life in and of themselves. And so, but when you look at the ways all of the women that I'm writing with, they all have this, they all pay attention to words. They have this love of words. They're very careful, very respectful, and they do treat them as though they have a life and deserve respect for being sentient beings in the world. And one theorist I didn't talk about is Simone Weil, who was a contemporary of Simone de Beauvoir. I do write about her. She has this beautiful phrase about paying attention. Pay attention to words. Words matter. And she talks about that moment of suspending thought to pay attention. And I call it the hush. She's asking us just to slow down. But each of these writers do have this absolute kind of way of just sitting in that hush and waiting for words to speak and to come into their own being. And I think that's a really, really inspiring but also exciting prospect. What would our writing look like if we all treated words in that way and we paid them attention and we really found out, where have you come from? Is that you are here now and where are you going? And we tried to, live life with them, and we didn't try. And there's a lot of talk amongst all of them about containing words and putting words in containers and fixing them. And the reference to the butterflies throughout is a reference to butterfly boxes and dictionaries being like butterfly boxes, where all of a sudden words are pinned down and the meanings pinned down and no longer able to fly free in the world. And so I think that's maybe I like the idea of thinking that if we think about words in that way, that might be moving towards the just that we're searching for to get there. Because words, whether we like it or not, words and language are what we have as autoethnographers. That's what we have to work with. So let's pay attention.
Wonderful, beautiful. Thanks so much, Rebecca, for that wonderful question. I think, Liz, in this group, and for those of you who are kind of new to this gathering, I think that you'll see this resonating across the years. The kind of care in that open, free play with the words of theory is something that I think that we hold as one of our commitments, as well as one of the great joys in autoethnographic research and writing. And Liz is just so masterful at doing that work. And it's a little deceptive, because it's so seamless and so poetic. The real care and construction that goes on. So I'm just so thrilled that folks were able to dip into your book a little bit. And I think I hope I can speak for all of us to say we're just so excited to have that available. I can't wait to read it.
I hope so. Just one thing, part of the reason why I chose to share that work with you is because it was written in the bubble moment of going into lockdown. And so it was being really immersed in the work of these writers, and particularly at the beginning, Simone de Beauvoir. I was listening to her as I was walking by the river. I was reading her. And also I want to just give a special shout out and love to the bubble we have, which is the Draw Group, which we meet every morning, 8 a.m. every weekday without fail, except not Christmas Day maybe, but sitting in that bubble with the drawers and being able to talk about the words I was hearing and reading and falling in love with, and sharing that with all of the drawers was amazing. So a lot of the work that you hear was written in the bubble of being in the COVID bubbles.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
And thank you, drawers, for coming along and supporting your dear one today. It really is beautiful to see you respond to Liz's work. What a great bubble family you've made there, Liz. Yeah. Thank you all, everyone. Wow, we're just full up, and there's just so much more amazing stuff to come. So I am, just so we can have this Zoom in its own bubble, I'm going to unceremoniously end the meeting in a moment, but then we'll be right back here in this Zoom stream for our VA, CAE AEVA making session with Dave, Fatowi, and Joshua. So go grab a cuppa and take just a tiny break, and we'll be right back in here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Liz.